welcome again to everyone who's joined us thus far. I think there will still be people joining us in the next few minutes. I want to say initially that we are recording this and it will be available on Craft in America's website after the event for anyone who wasn't able to join. All of our talks are filmed or recorded, and the link where they are on our website is listed here below on this first slide. And just a word about Reading Craft. This is our first Reading Craft event via Zoom. So we started the Reading Craft book club about 3 years ago as an in-person book club, and we've covered all kinds of books that related to the exhibitions that we've had on view here at the center, book launches, book release events, and all kinds of discussions in an in-person format. This is our new version of it. And we're very excited to be starting today. So first of all, I want to thank and welcome our special guests today, Jean Pierre Larochette and Yadin Larochette. Thank you so much for joining us today from Berkeley and sharing your brand new publication, Anatomy of a Tapestry. And we're very much looking forward to hearing what you will be presenting today. Just mentioning again for anyone who's just tuning in now, you're welcome to, through the course of the presentation, Jean-Pierre and Yadin are going to be doing at the initial portion of our event today, a slide presentation, and that will be followed by a Q&A. Please feel free to, as we're in the process of listening, posting your questions in the Q&A so that they can be addressed afterwards. We'll also have an opportunity, if you prefer to be on camera and ask the questions verbally, we'll have that possibility as well once we switch to that part of the presentation. So to begin, the book that we're looking at today is recently published by Schiffer. It's available for purchase. We'll have a link for that information available. Hopefully many of you have already had a chance to look at this incredibly useful technical guide that's extremely poetically written in addition. That's what really has struck me for this book, that balance of technical and poetic and how your voices come through. So Jean Pierre is a 4th generation Aubusson weaver, master weaver, and who is born and raised in Argentina. This is a family affair, this project, and Yadin Larochette, his daughter, is both a weaver and a textile conservator. And they will be providing their background, and I'm sure it will be mentioned during your presentation that you work collaboratively with wife and mother, Yael Lori, who has always been a part of your process and who provided illustrations for the book as well. And with that, I just want to thank you again for this presentation and pass it over to you to begin.
All right, well, thank you, Emily, so much for this honor. We're so pleased to be here. And hello to all. And I'll pass it on to Jean Pierre to start.
Yes, thank you, Emily. This is a wonderful opportunity. Greetings, friends in cyberspace. We are going to be talking about weaving and looking at a screen. Well, a sign of the times. Weaving, the making of clothes, is known to be one of the earliest technologies. Despite all its achievements and cultural splendor, tapestry is basically a very simple form of weaving. It's shown in Babylon and ancient Egypt, in Greece and Rome, in Asia and in pre-Columbian America. In Europe, tapestry reached its highest development as an art form during the Middle Ages. This book was born out of a lifelong love story, a passion that in tapestry tradition is transmitted from one generation to the next. The techniques presented here are the legacy of centuries of weavers' works and inventiveness. On the other hand, theories and approach to conservation are routinely updated with new scientific research helping in the much needed task of preserving these treasures of human creativity. For Yadin, working on this book was a tour de force that dedicated weekends and holidays, an effort that I'm thankful for, adding an important dimension to its technical aspects. For me, I have to admit, the project was a product of older age. About 4 years ago, in grateful appreciation for a lifelong practice as a tapestry weaver, I wanted to focus not so much in what you can do with it, but in exploring the very nature of what the weave is.
In 2009, the General Assembly of UNESCO added Aubusson tapestry on the representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity. In this document, Aubusson weavers are described as a community of professionals which, for more than 5 centuries, have kept alive the entire range of skills which go into making an Aubusson tapestry.
The French town of Aubusson has a population of about 5,000 and is located in the department of Creuse, in the larger region known today as Nouvelle-Aquitaine, about 300 miles south of Paris. The legendary Aquitaine was the land of the troubadours, poet-musicians of the 12th and 13th centuries, and the Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine of the court of Love, a broad-minded patron of the arts and one of the wealthiest women of her time. The language then was not French, but Occitan, still spoken today. Novelist George Sand, at her time more popular than her contemporaries Honoré Balzac and Victor Hugo, was born in the Indre department next to Creuse and wrote extensively about the people of the region. The reason I'm bringing her here on this presentation is because while writing the novel Jeanne in 1844, she stayed at Chateau Boussac, a few miles from Aubusson. It was there, hidden behind a double wall in her bedroom, that she discovered the iconic tapestries of the Lady and the Unicorn. The drawing of one of the tapestry scenes, top right, is by her son Maurice, then a teenager. It is thanks to her effort that eventually the tapestries, which origins are still unknown, were transported to Paris and today are at the Cluny Museum. During the modern renaissance of tapestry, from the end of World War II to about the 1960s, Aubusson had over 50 workshops, some employing as much as 30 to 40 weavers. Large ateliers had their own dyeing facility, a section where the yarns were wound up into spools and bobbins, and several rooms with an area for finishing the tapestries. Pioneering photojournalist Robert Duesneau traveled to Aubusson in 1946 to cover the many aspects of the craft, including the work of leading designers such as Jean u.s.a, Raoul Dufy, and Marcel Gromer. My grandparents, Jules and François Rosalie, top left, born in Aubusson in the 1870s, were both tapestry weavers. He was also a stonemason. In times of need, along with neighboring craftsmen, he will walk the 300 miles to the construction site of Paris. Around the turn of the 20th century, a younger generation of weavers, my father among them, would take their weaving skill through Europe and to other continents. Armand, here on the right of the screen, established his first tapestry workshops in Buenos Aires, Argentina. His cousin, Jacques Gaillet, came to the United States in 1895 and wove for William Baumgarten in Williamsbridge, New York City. While traveling in Argentina in the 1930s, my father fell in love with the remote South, the region known as Patagonia. Eventually, he established a second workshop there in 1948, when I was 6 years old. I left Patagonia at 17, but as it happened, during a visit with my partner, designer Yael Lurie, 10 years later, is where Yadin was born.
Patagonia is a harsh, rugged land of great beauty, with a rich but tragic history. One of the many cultural achievements of the native Mapuche communities who live on both sides of the Andes Mountains in Chile and Argentina are their textile creations.
The impact of two different textile visions, the figurative Aubusson pieces from my father's atelier and the weavings of intricate geometry beautifully created by our Mapuche neighbors, have been at the heart of my love and appreciation of weaving. It gave my young apprenticeship a sense of exploration and discovery. The awareness of other visions reinforced my interest in the textual culture of my people. The Mapuche weave is war-faced, and the figures created at the loom are distilled into symbols. The vision is conceptual, reflecting a deep sense of harmony and balance. Chilean anthropologist Pedro Meje Rosso describes the theme of this right at the center here of the screen as containing information regarding the medicinal use of chilco, a type of fuchsia flower for heart-related disease. The elements of the compositions are heart, veins, and the chilco flower. These representations are different than the ones we are used to in our culture. An object is turned into a textile design by a series of mental steps. The first is a vertical or horizontal cut, which unfolds the image into symmetrical mirror image parts. Other similar transformative steps follow. Aubusson tapestry, on the other hand, or low warp weaving in general, is weft-faced, figurative, and traditionally follows a design previously conceived. Landscape designer John Williamson, the gardener for the cloisters at the Metropolitan Museum of New York, points out that the iconic unicorn in captivity depict 26 plants, some of them well known in medicinal botany. Building up the weaving following shapes and the interaction of color through systematic hatchings are key elements of this technique.
The role of tapestry through history as an object of prestige is well documented. In Europe, there's even a touch of the divine, as they were much desired by popes, queens, and kings. Thomas Campbell wrote that Henry VIII owned such a vast collection that if hung side by side, they would have covered 4 miles. Major artists of all ages, in love with the fabulous proportions of the medium, dreamt of their paintings in tapestry. Throughout the centuries, tapestry adapted to the demands and styles of the times to the extent that often, in order to succeed, it had to pretend to be what it is not, as in it's not a painting.
In what consists, however, the savoir-faire, the know-how that was being so highly celebrated by the United Nations? In that regard, there is a surprising absence of documentation. The Diderot d'Alembert Encyclopedia of the Arts and Science, published in 1751, dedicates 37 pages to tapestry, illustrated with wonderful engravings that are very popular in most historical books. Yet there is not a single description of technique.
In December of 2015, the Getty Center presented the exhibition Woven Gold, Tapestries of Louis XIV. And I was invited by Charissa Bremer-David to conduct a series of talks and weaving demonstrations. Aware of the limited number of existing technical diagrams in tapestry literature, Jean Pierre set out to create some of his own for me to use. What was intended to cover a couple of basic techniques led him into an adventure that has lasted 3 years.
The design of the book responds to the idea of having in opposite pages the information illustrating each technique while keeping the printed image of the weaving actual size. Related to the medium for the diagrams, ink of graphite was my first consideration. And scale, what are the minimum amount of verbs I needed for each technique? Then, to my surprise, I noticed that my fingers knew more than what my mind did. So I warped a loom and diligently drew pass after pass, starting with the simplest techniques. These drawings are about 14 by 18 inches. The microcosm of the interaction of just 2 colors, rarely 3, fascinated me. The process acquired unexpected dimensions. Since I was illustrating weavings, why not include actual weavings to the illustrations? For clarity, I wove these models with cotton twine at 8 warps per inch.
Tapestry weave has 2 distinct faces, the front and the back, that do not look exactly alike. To illustrate that effect, Jean Pierre wove the models for the book twice, once from the front and once from the back. To keep the warp under tension, he mounted each pair on mat board, and these models were scanned and printed actual size for the book.
Having now diagrams and models, I invited a couple of weaving friends to work from them. During this stage, I realized that for a more complete and meaningful study, I should weave small pieces exploring each technique. To keep again the printing actual size for the book, these applications of techniques are about 5 by 5 inches. At this point, I had two very helpful collaborators. My partner, Yael Lurie, refining the compositions of the applications of technique, and weaver Mary Lane from Olympia, Washington, editing and keeping each text description as concise as possible. We organized the material in 9 chapters. The first 4 relating to weaving are entitled Weaving from the Loom with a Glimpse into History, Techniques, Woven Musings, Finding Metaphors in Everyday Practice, and Functions of the Tapestry Loom.
The next 4 chapters are dedicated to conservation, titled Materials, Notes on Finishing a Display, Notes on Care, and Notes on Storage. The 9th chapter, A Weaver's Path, shows personal explorations of tapestry by contemporary artists in regions of the United States and Mexico. The first chapter, Views from the Loom with a Glimpse into History, opens with a definition of tapestry. In its broad definition, the term tapestry includes all types of wall hangings, be hand-woven, embroidered, or machine-made. For example, one of the best-known historical pieces described as tapestry, the 11th century Bayeux cloth, is not a tapestry at all, but a very large embroidery. Technically, we define tapestry as a distinctive woven structure known as a discontinuous, weft-faced plain weave. Tapestries are hand-woven under high tension, allowing for full coverage of the warp by the weft.
The Glimpse into History section is a brief survey of the technical and artistic development of tapestry since the Middle Ages. From Jean Bondol's Angers Apocalypse designs in the 14th century to Jean u.s.a. in the 20th, special attention is given to tapestry association with painting. For example, the pack, the very painterly image at the center, was designed in 1730 by Jean-Baptiste Audry, court painter and the director of the Gobelin workshops in Paris. It required an extremely fine weave in a great number of colors. On the other hand, both Jean Bondol in the 1300s and Jean u.s.a. in modern times were designers well aware of the inherent potential of the medium, and they designed specifically for it. The chapter concludes with brief notes on tapestry durability and on the traditional methods of weaving from the reverse, which result in a mirror image of the design and from side to side, rather than from the bottom up. We end with a note on the so often asked question, how long does it take to weave a tapestry? Paraphrasing weaver Lisa Trujillo of Chimayo, New Mexico, who wrote, "Our weavings are created primarily of wool and time," I will design an imaginary label stating 10% cotton, 10% wool, 80% time.
The average time for an average texture of weave from an average design, lots of averages, is about a month per square yard.
Yes, tapestry weaving is a very slow process. A woven form grows row by row, much as a text is written one word at a time. The left section of this tapestry illustrates the over and under movement of the weft across the warp. The warp threads, the vertical white bars in the image, are firmly stretched on the loom. They are the structural foundation of the weave. Toward the right of the tapestry, coming from the intersection of warp and weft, forms are born. Much like pixels in an image, the finer the weave, the sharper and more detailed the result.
Love Letters was designed by Yael based on work spanning from the time of my parents' first collaborations half a century ago. Visually, it's a reference to a variety of techniques which we present under three categories: shapes, patterns, and lines. The aim of these studies is not to present a mechanical approach of technique, but rather a holistic one, using tapestry techniques as a means for expressing visual ideas.
For clarity, when working on the diagrams, I separated each pass as is seen before the comb packs the weave down. These were like snapshots of the weft in action. Looking into the details of these drawings, fascinated by the Mondrian-like compositions with their well-balanced division of space and structural simplicity, I couldn't resist but have to weave them. Each tapestry based on these details are about 15 by 15 inches.
You can see some behind us as well.
As one delves into the nature of the weave, another aspect that emerges is the value of repetition. The process carries on a ritualistic form of repetition, not generated by machine, automatic, or programmed. It is mindful and organic, ever-changing. Tapestry gift to the weaver is to embody the repetitive motion of the work, the rhythm of the hand, making it visible in images of vibrant tessellations. Like in a Russian Nestle doll, there is repetition within repetition found at each step of the weaving process, such as when shaping or shading with hatching, all in perfect unison and mathematical balance. I found it in a mismatched, complex world, a very elemental, reassuring logic.
Techniques are the synthesis decanted from centuries of weaving explorations. Observing the many ways in which the parts interact, metaphorical lessons emerge. In shaping, we observe shapes are woven upon shapes, each one the foundation of the next. All shapes that make a tapestry are equally important. Foreground and background, positive and negative spaces, all require the same skill and effort. Two or more colors are needed to create a shape. A tapestry is made of hundreds of shapes interacting in concert with each other.
Chapter 4 is a brief examination of the mechanics of tapestry looms. The most important component of a tapestry loom is its tensioning device. To weave tapestry, the warp must be tightly stretched. The two basic systems are expansion and rotation. Some looms use both systems. The top two sketches show method of expansion for high warp looms, a traditional Navajo and a modern pipe loom, as in the late Archie Brennan style. The Aubusson bass lease or low warp combines both systems, adding rotation to expansion. The sketch on the bottom left illustrates an early rope and lever method. On the right, a modern adaptation using metal parts such as ratchets, poles, and acme screws. During the last 35 years, we were happy and proud to have Yadin occasionally working with us. be in weaving commission or in editing or writing project. This, however, is our first co-authoring collaboration. Her expertise and experience in textile conservation adds vastly to the aim of this book. With text graphics designed by Yael, she opens the 5th chapter listing 7 of the most used fibers. Natural and synthetics are described in detail with insight on their historical backgrounds.
Before a tapestry is hung for display, hundreds of hours of careful work can go into its preparation. This chapter, chapter 6, discusses methods of finishing and display, as well as methods of binding ends, closing slits, and lining and mounting tapestries in both large and small format. Preservation, conservation, and restoration methods are discussed in chapter 7. Tapestries are vulnerable to all sorts of forces, and understanding these forces can help mitigate damage. Preservation aspects include proper handling, preventing light damage, insect and pest management, air quality, and display locations as well. And surface cleaning, washing, and local stain reduction are also discussed in this chapter. For weavers, galleries, and collectors, the storage information in chapter 8 can be useful. For both small format and larger pieces, proper storage methods are crucial to ensuring the longevity of the tapestries as well as other artworks. The chapter ends with tips for packing a tapestry for transport and installation.
The weaver method of working is usually dictated by tradition. It is fascinating to see how the basic 2 threads, warp and weft, can be used in so many different and eloquent ways within the same technique. The chapter, A Weaver Path, is a brief visit to this array of expressions. To the left is At the Window, 44 by 22 inches by former Archie Brennan from Dovecot, Scotland. At the bottom left is Archie weaving among sheep in New Zealand, I believe. And to the right, Saltillo Shroud, 72 by 48 inches by Irving Trujillo from Centinela Traditional Arts in Chimayo, New Mexico.
To the left, Aire Zapoteco, it's 48 by 40 inches by Erasto Mendoza Ruiz from Teotitlán del Valle, Oaxaca, Mexico. To the right is De Milieu, which is 83 by 56 inches by Susan Martin Maffei of New York. From left to right, Watermelon, 12 by 8 inches by Jackie Willenberg from Fort Bragg, California. So Between, which is 8 by 2.2 inches by Kathy Todd Hooker from Albany, Oregon. And An Homage to House Painters, 50 by 24 inches by the late Gabriel Canales from Guadalajara, Mexico. In this work, the small tapestries make up some of the brushes.
And finally, we end with this very brief comparative study, a subject that certainly merits volumes. To the left, Traditional Revival, 21 by 16 inches by Barbara Teller Ornelas, and from Two Gray Hills, New Mexico, and March Grass, 48 by 36 inches by Julian Mitchell from Vineyard Haven, Massachusetts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this overview of the new book. It's fantastic. I'm going to say again that we are recording. This will be available afterwards on craftinamerica.org. And I'm going to invite everyone attending to either share their questions, which I will then pose to Yadin and Jean Pierre if you write them in the Q&A. Or if you'd like, you can raise your hand and we will be able to share your screen with them and you can ask them your question directly. And for all of you, there should be a button at the center of your screen on the bottom that you can press to raise your hand. I'd like to begin by asking you, I have so many questions. I mean, you really kind of establish a primer for understanding the language of tapestry. I think this is such a useful tool for curators, for artists, for teachers, collectors, and it's just brilliant. But I wonder about the design of the book itself as an object is unusual with the spiral bound structure, and would love to hear about how that came about. And to me, I can see that it would be beneficial for a couple reasons, but I think it also establishes it kind of as a language primer, but would love to know how that process worked for designing the actual book. And in the meantime, please, in terms of the audience, pose your questions as well.
Well, like everything else, what I do really, the book was imagined for about, 50 years? At least with Yadin for 35 years. But I never had a real vision. I knew by looking at other books that there are in the market what has been done, and I was trying to do something different. And it happened very organically. The design of the book really responds to the need to show these different aspects of the process in a way that you see it, in front of you, and you don't have to go back or forward and find where is, image 17 or whatever. So I have to say that the Schiffer Publishing and people who work with us there, they've been extremely generous. I mean, they didn't change absolutely nothing from even the size, we were told that working with, a large publishing company, it have its drawbacks and we should be ready for changes, but they were super respectful with the intention.
Great. And so, and in terms of working with a designer, or did you kind of say this has to be spiral bound and yeah.
Well, we didn't, it has to be, but we were, in our initial meeting, we were talking about general design aspects, and spiral bound was something we both really felt strongly about. But we also wanted it, because I think many of us have spiral bound books that once you put them on the shelf, you forget what it is because you see the spiral binding and not what it is. So to be able to combine both the luxury of having the book completely open and that you can see opposite pages at the same time without too much of a problem, and then be able to actually identify the book once it's on the shelf with it being covered was really exceptional. Yeah.
Great. Question coming through from Alessandro Vincentelli. Would like to know how you create the amazing three-dimensionality of the tapestry on the wall behind you.
Well, actually, one of the basic motivations for the book was to show weaving in its three-dimensionality. A tapestry is an object. It's not just an image in a screen or, a kind of glue onto a wall. It's actually is not just an object, but it's a living object. It keeps changing forever. 500 tapestries today are still moving. So to show that aspect of it, came in the pieces you see behind us here, came after we wrote the book. Once the book was delivered, I was stuck with all these images in my head, and I sat down and with the help of Yael, my wife and designer, say, let's take sections of the drawings, of the diagrams, and turn them into small weavings. And I couldn't stop. I'm still working on them, you know, and this has been over a year now.
Yeah, and in terms of the nuts and bolts of it, other than the design aspect, the materials that Jean Pierre chose on these weavings, you know, there's use of silk for highlighting the lights, and I'm not sure wool or cotton on the darks. So more of a matte fiber for the dark areas that you want to recess, visually drop out, and then shinier fibers such as silk and DMC in some cases, and embroidery floss for the highlights.
Right. Well, actually, I would like to add that behind wonderful Yadin head here, that one is a X-ray view of what the one in the center shows, where we inverted the values, and it's hanging from the back. What you see is the back of the tapestry, not the front. Another, you know, effort to explore the weave.
Incredibly complex, yeah, and manifesting it in so many levels. It's, yeah, almost overwhelming. Let's see, we have a question about differences between, upholstered wall tapestries and hanging wall tapestries. Is conservation treatment different for hanging tapestries?
Upholstered wall tapestries. Well, first of all, I don't feel there's a wrong or right. There's always reasons behind choices on how works are mounted, and you know, sometimes I do find myself wondering when I'm in an exhibit and they've decided to stitch a tapestry that would normally hang onto a rigid support. That reduces, I mean, it may lay it flat, but then it reduces the three-dimensionality of the work in certain situations. On the other hand, if a work is too fragile to withstand its own weight, then, you know, there are reasons why tapestries would be applied to a secondary support that is rigid. So I don't know if that was the question about upholstered. I mean, tapestry as a medium has been used in upholstery for furniture as well. I mean, traditionally, that's been, you know, for hundreds of years, and we can find those in many museums. But I'm not sure if I've answered the question.
Yeah, I think that's a start. I think you do address, yeah, display treatments also in a bit more detail in the book. So
right, yeah, and one of the examples that I include there are slant boards, because in some cases tapestries that are very fragile are applied to a board that is rather than onto the wall, so that it has a certain amount of less weight hanging to support it. It's supported by the slant board.
Yeah, is optimal, although occupies so much more floor space, of course. So.
Right, and it's not, I mean, and also it's not the original intention of the work was originally intended to hang freely. So, you know, there are compromises sometimes to be made when you're preventing future damage.
We have a question about the earliest artworks from Maria Dmitrieva. Earliest artworks described in the book, and what technique, I assume. Yeah. You do span multiple cultures. Was it intended to be all encompassing? It seems like it's also your personal lens, which is so global, really. Mapuche, Aubusson, your experiences in Israel, how you kind of synthesize all of that together. Did you intend this to be that your perspective, or kind of the overview of tapestry everywhere? broadly.
Good. We can't help but have a personal perspective. I don't think anyone can pretend not to. But also, nothing is created in a vacuum. So I think part of the intention was to kind of show how all of different cultures either simultaneously were creating works with similar techniques, or that would then inspire or share their techniques with, or be cross-pollination of cultures that would then create a new technique. But I don't know the earliest ones, I can't even remember.
Well, yeah, I think that also it shows the universality of tapestry as a textile medium. You know, as I say in the beginning, it's one of the simplest form of weaving, you know, over and under, over and under, that's it. Now it offers, because this simplicity, the greatest range of expression, artistic expression. And I think that, you know, I couldn't be just Eurocentric and talk about this, ignoring, you know, that it's just a part of this wonderful textile world, and that though it's not my expertise, I wanted to show some appreciation and open this view. You know, the alphabet was created about 6,000 years ago. And so is the invention of the headers. The header. The header is that mechanism that separates every other warp and creates a space for the weft to go through. Those two are about equally ancient. And it means something to me.
Absolutely. We have a question from Facebook. Dee Dee Woodbury says, your family is a legacy worldwide. And do you plan a museum for your work? Very lovely question.
It's a lovely question. It's a lovely thought. It takes resources to run a museum, as Emily well knows.
Yes, I forgot to put in the label there, in my imaginary label. 95% of the time goes into weaving. We have been terrible about reaching out and trying to have our work exhibited. It happens now and then because there is some wonderful soul that allows it to happen. But otherwise, we haven't. But maybe now, you know, that the book is out, that this wonderful program has expanded our audience for sure.
Yeah.
And we are so honored by it. That, and also the times. I think this is a perfect time for the solidity of the craft.
Yeah, and I should add that we started planning this event, gosh, over a year ago, and it was our hope that at the Craft in America Center, we would be able to show the work along with holding this event. So yes, the hope is there that everyone will have a chance to see these pieces in person eventually. Absolutely. We have a question, Barbara Nitzberg, how are the pieces on the wall behind you mounted and hung? They stand away from the wall. At least that is how they appear to all of us.
Okay, so the technique, this is something that Jean Pierre developed, and hi Barbara, by the way, is on acrylic. So he drilled holes into the acrylic sheet and then stitched the tapestry through the acrylic with a straight needle.
And there's a small...
Right, and that the mounting system on the back is he attached a wooden structure to then be able to hang out a picture hanging cable.
Okay, okay, great.
There are oh, he's going to turn one around just to show you. There is an example of this also in the book.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for showing that, because yeah, it is, again, this is the beauty of and the difficulties of presenting this way. Hard to understand that would be how it is. Someone's asking about how to get started in this art form. And I don't know if this is also a chance to talk a little bit about the San Francisco Tapestry Workshop and your work there that was so pivotal in expanding the world of tapestry in the US decades ago. But yes, how does somebody start now is the question.
There are a few wonderful teachers in different areas of the country. I don't know where the question is coming from, but here in California, here in Berkeley, we have teachers. I believe that in New York, of course, and all through the country, there are fantastic weavers. I think that one of the first things to do will be look for American Tapestry Alliance, ATA, American Tapestry Alliance. It's an organization that was born around the time of the San Francisco Tapestry Workshop. Actually, the first meeting of American Tapestry Alliance was at our workshop in San Francisco, and it is international and do extraordinary outreaching.
Great, thank you. Questions. Can you use magnetic mounting for tapestry?
Yes, that's also discussed in the book briefly. I mean, you know, this was it's tricky to balance how to do and cover various topics, and that would require a whole book in itself, which actually exists. Gwen Spicer has recently published a book on mounting not just tapestries, but mounting all sorts of artworks with rare earth magnets. Actually, the two little fish in a can that we showed earlier in the presentation, I mounted those with magnets.
One of the quotes in the book that I like is how weaving tells the stories of our time. And I wonder how you see that happening today. Certainly fiber has come more to the forefront of the contemporary art world. How does tapestry specifically play a role in that? What do you see happening now in 2020 or very recent?
Well, personal expression is always dealing with our own history, our own time. So in tapestry, there is this tradition of being a form of illustration of events, not really a reference to the artistic process in itself. Was shown artistically, but without the essence of the core of the creative process. And I think that now what is slowly evolving, and thanks to a great teacher that we unfortunately lost a few months ago, Archie Brennan, our own work, I believe, was also important in that, is that the division between designer and weaver, which is the traditional French approach, it was kind of erased. And now what we see is the artist weaver, and the art, or the weaver artist, whatever. And that is probably where the future is.
Let's see, we have time for one more question. And then we'll probably close, but I just wanted to also ask where you are, well, aside from current situation in the pandemic, where your studios are at this point and kind of how you spread your time. You're both so nomadic and migratory. If you could tell people a little bit about where you do the work normally.
Yes, well, Yadin was based in Los Angeles for the last 16 years, so we couldn't get together that much. We both did our work kind of independently, and then meet somewhere, and usually in one of the nomadic studios we have, I have three similar rooms in different places, and I go from one to the other, and I don't need even to need the work on one. I can always roll the piece up and take it with me to the next room. I roll it up again, or unroll it, and then continues weaving. So that is one aspect. The other one is that, you know, weaving is, you know, I shouldn't, you know, probably to explain this, but it's a very lonely task. You absorb the essence, you know, you absorb the spirit of the place. And each place is different, so it's very invigorating. For example, if I'm weaving a certain composition about diagonal shapes in Mexico, I will take maguey as my, my model, right? I have it right there in the garden, and so forth. So those places are Berkeley, which has been the base since 1974, I believe. Then El Tuito, Jalisco, Mexico, since 2000. Before that, we worked in Mexico, but not in our own studio. And for the last 3 years with Yadin, we've been doing a lot of work for the book up here in a small town up the Sierras called Twain Harte. I don't know if you're familiar with, is on Highway 108 towards Sonora Pass. Above Sonora, the city of Sonora.
Does being in the different locations shift your work in any ways you could describe?
Does working in different locations shift your work? Which I think you just
yeah, that is right.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. It does, and that I found that really exciting, and you know. And it's a reason to go after a while to the next place, you know, to get inspired again.
Yeah. And do you ever absorb the traditions? You know, for instance, you spoke earlier about Mapuche being an influence in certain ways in your work, of course. Mexico, you know, do you find yourself working differently than when you're in Northern California?
Yes, you know, in Tapestry, we have done work in Mexico, especially with the weavers of Teotitlán del Valle, Oaxaca, the Zapotec weavers. We have organized a few museum shows with them. One was at the Textile Museum of Oaxaca. Mm-hmm. Another one was in the Museum of the University of Guadalajara in Puerto Vallarta campus. So, and we've been able to do a kind of exchange workshop where they will meet with American weavers, Americans meaning Canadians, U.S., and work together. We did this once as a program that was very successful. Yes, I'm constantly inspired. You know, tapestry weaving really, when you get down to it, it's a lifestyle. You know, you have to take your precautions, you have to keep healthy, you have to live with little because you are not going to be making much money. And you have to keep, you know, hoping that the next piece is going to be more exciting than the last, because otherwise it's boring. So the part that I enjoy the most about the living along indigenous cultures, like the Mapuche friends we have in South America, or the Zapotec friends, is that their wisdom, you know, they know what they are doing. And that is a constant inspiration. Now, if that translates, you know, in the form, in the composition of a piece, I'm not sure. But certainly in the spirit that the piece is created.
Thank you. Okay, for our last question, ancient dyes, discussion of dye processes in the book. You delved much into that.
Well, I thought it was important, not so much on the materials section, because, you know, dyeing is such, A, I'm not an expert, number one, and B, it's a very complex and vast body of information that is readily available in other publications. What I tried to instill was more on historical tapestries and sensitivity to light, and what, you know, what dyes and what kind of dyes may cause be more sensitive to fading than others, and the whys behind that. I really tried to emphasize why things are happening, to kind of help understand conservation ethics and protocols. And that was really fun for me too, just in terms of the research and learning about the different guilds and the different rules they had, and how many of these rules were broken, and then the kind of repercussions that workshops would have. I mean, if they were using dyes that were not, that were like blacklisted because they were not considered color fast, then their tapestries would be confiscated, taken away. So, you know, there's all sorts of interesting historical facts that came to light when I was putting this together. But I did not go into great detail on current dye use, because I think there's a lot out there that people can, you know, a lot of resources.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. Yes, the book covers so many topics. It's just a critical source, I think, and I hope everyone has a chance to look at it themselves. So thank you to Jean Pierre and Yadin so much for today's talk. We are grateful, and thank you to everyone for attending. Again, you can revisit this on our website, the recorded version, and we wish everyone well. Be safe. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.